Well, hello, Rob. Welcome to the show. I'm honored that you're here.
Oh, thank you, Liz. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You're so accomplished. You've earned an Emmy. You have been a producer and a writer for many, many years. But before we get into all of that, including your latest book for children, can you talk a little bit about the major events, or maybe they were minor in your life, that led you to the work that you're doing now in art, creative arts?
Wow, well, that's a big topic. I mean, I've said this before, but I guess the main event that kind of put me on the trajectory I'm on did come from my mother. She was not an artist herself, but she was an accomplished, I guess, tracer or copier. When I was very young, I had all these coloring books, and I rather than damage them by cutting out the images, I wanted her to make me a copy of images so then she could cut them out or I could cut them out and I could play with paper dolls. So I was constantly asking her to draw stuff for me that I saw in my own coloring books, so that I don't know why I cared so much about not damaging the original image, but for some reason I did. And I did this so often that eventually she said, well, why don't you try drawing them for yourself? And I did. That's how I started drawing, basically, because my mother, I was stressing my mother out with all this extra requirement to draw images for me. So I've been drawing since a very, very early age, and fell in love with cartoons, fell in love with the medium, and was always doing, coming up with my own original characters and doing stories for them, doing very primitive comics with them, or doing like one panel gags with them. So I've been drawing and writing since a very young age. And really, my mother is the one who started me on that journey.
Well, that's amazing. It's like she could see in you what you were already really good at and what you were already attracted to.
Well, that's a very complimentary way of putting it for her. You know, she was no, she was. I love my mother. She was an excellent mother. She was actually very encouraging of me once I did start drawing. My father was always a little bit skeptical that I could make a career in this field, but my mother always supported me, and always, both emotionally and financially. And when it came time to cart me off to California to go to a very expensive art school, she made sure that that happened despite my father's grousing. So.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that. See, we never would have known if I hadn't asked that question. I love it.
Very true.
Okay, well, let's get into the inspiration for the book. It's called The Horrible Bag of Terrible Things, and it's actually
Yes.
part of a trilogy.
Yes.
Can you talk about the inspiration for the book and how it came to be?
A couple of inspirations. Again, I have to turn to another woman, the other important woman in my life, who's my wife of close to 30 years. She has a real talent for a turn of phrase, and she's the one who came up with the phrase, the horrible bag of terrible things. It was actually in reference to a grocery bag of old tax receipts and phone bills and stuff that we were doing our best to ignore, that was glowering from the corner at us. But that title stuck in my mind, and I've been wanting to, I've done a few books for Disney Publishing, which were based on their own characters, and I've wanted to be doing a book of my own idea for a while. And so there was that title kind of hanging in my consciousness. And the other inspiration again comes from cartoons, which is Felix the Cat. In the 1960s version of Felix the Cat had this bag of tricks, which made a big impact on me when I saw those cartoons on TV. It's just this, very much like the horrible bag. It's like looked like a doctor's satchel or an old-fashioned kind of suitcase. And he used to pull magical things out of it, and it would transform into magical things. So magic inside of a bag has been kind of in my head since I was a kid.
Mm,
So that was kind of how the idea that there might be a world inside of this bag came to me first.
I love it. And you almost liken it to an Alice in Wonderland story.
For
How is it
sure,
different
yeah.
than that? I mean, because it's not, I mean, that was a pretty intense story of its time. And then this is just completely, I don't want to say off the wall, but it grabs your attention immediately.
I hope so. That's the point. But I mean, Alice in Wonderland was a huge influence on it. And just the absurdity of Alice in Wonderland, I always loved that. I was a big fan of the Disney version of the in the movie version of it, Alice, that Disney put out. But also, reading the original stories, they're just really strange and absurd, and they seem I don't know. They're just, I wanted to do kind of a like a kind of a darker Alice in Wonderland, though Alice in Wonderland obviously itself has got some very dark, strange elements to it. And I think I always think that children's literature that leaves that the darker aspect of things out of it is doing a disservice to children in a way. Um, because children experience all this stuff in the real world. They experience the darker parts of the world, no matter how their parents may try and shield them from them. I mean, you know, as a parent, I'm not a parent, but you know, as a parent, that it's just impossible to shield your children completely. So I think it's best to prepare them for that stuff. And I think children's literature that includes some portion of that is doing them a service, that stuff that leaves it out may not be doing for them. So I love those dark aspects of Alice, and I wanted to kind of get that into the book. And certainly the idea that you tumble into a strange world of your own volition was something that the Horrible Bag and Wonderland have in common.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, because I do feel like as parents, it is our job to fully prepare our children as best we can for the realities of the world. And if you do shield them too much, when they do go off to school or they do leave the nest and they're faced with real adversity and they have no real coping mechanisms, I mean, you provide the coping mechanisms through your character stories and through their emotions and their own internal monologue. Was it easy to write for Zenith and to convey his feelings about what was going on? Or did you feel like I mean, how was it writing for this guy?
I mean, it was relatively easy. He is kind of my equivalent. He is the character that's closest to me in the book. I am rather sarcastic, and he has a sarcastic streak to him. One thing we don't share in common is he's actually good at sports, and I've always been rubbish at every sport I ever tried. Besides golf, which I have a little bit of ability, but not much, only because my father forced me to play it throughout my childhood because he was a golf fanatic. So if I wanted to see my father on the weekend, I had to be on the golf course with him. My mom and I would play with him usually on a Sunday afternoon. But yeah, no, I'm not very good at golf or any other sports really. But no, Zenith is me, and um, I've kind of written for this audience my whole career in the form of the cartoons. The cartoons I've always worked on have mostly been geared towards a middle grade audience, so I feel like I kind of can hit that target. But I'm mostly just, I'm writing for something that I think will be entertaining for both adults and for children. So I try not to write down to children. I don't think it's wise to do so. If I felt like I was using vocabulary words that might be too much of a stretch for them, I felt like, well, they can always look that word up. And I always figured my editor would tell me, like, no, don't use that. That's too advanced for the age group or whatever. So I tried not to think about them in a way that would limit the book, because I feel like I don't want to limit their enjoyment of it. And that's what editors are for. And I've had a really good editor relationship with my people at Penguin. So I knew if I was doing something that didn't feel right to them for the age group, that they would tell me so.
Yeah, absolutely. Was it easier writing for Disney based on characters that had already existed, or was it harder coming up with your own? I mean, as a creative person?
It was obvious. I think it was easy. Yes, it's easier to work on something that pre-exists, especially the books I was writing for Disney, because a lot of times it would be like a retelling of something that happened on the TV show from maybe a different perspective or whatever. As well as coming up with new stuff. But that was easier than coming up with something from scratch. But luckily, there's kind of a trick you do as a creative person, which is you just sit in front of a blank sheet. And having been trained to be creative on a schedule my whole career, if I put myself on a schedule, I end up usually coming up with something. Some days are more productive than others, obviously. But most days I'll at least get a good paragraph out of a new story, or sometimes I'll get several pages. Or I'll just come up with a completely new character that I didn't have before I sat down. That turns out to be vital. It's not completely understandable, but if you do create for a living, that there's something, you develop this reflex that happens, which is you force yourself to be creative, and you come up with something. It might be bad. You might create something that's bad. You might create something that 2 weeks down the road, you're like, what was I thinking? But you will usually come up with something. So, it is both more challenging to come up with something from scratch, but also more rewarding when you do. So obviously I've been wanting to have something that was my very own in book form for a while. So I'm happy that I ended up forcing myself to sit in front of the screen.
Yeah, I love that you use the word forcing yourself, because listening to you, there does seem to be such an element of discipline. And it's like, if you have the natural ability, you have the talent, you have the desire, but if you don't have a schedule and sit down in front of that blank page, nothing is going to be created. And then, like you said, these characters that just came to you would never have happened. So what do you do specifically in your day if you are on a schedule? Okay, you've got your deadline. What do you do to really hone those skills to make sure that you're creating at the level that you want to create?
Yeah, I mean, one thing is just basically, this is something that I did when I first started on the first book, which took me several years to write because I was writing it basically an hour at a time in the morning. I decided I was an early riser anyways. I was going to wake up an hour earlier and devote an hour of the first hour of my day to try and write the story. And this I had a full-time job at Disney Television at the time. So basically I would do this and then I would go off and do my paying work. And a lot of writers have to do that. A lot of writers aren't making a living writing, so they have to kind of squeeze it in at some point. And everybody's different. Some people write late at night after they put their kids to bed if they have kids. Some people wake up early like me. I've always been a morning person, which is kind of on the minority in the artist community. I think
Yeah.
for the most part, certainly in animation, like
Mm.
but you know, so I'm used to that. I'm used to the idea that I'll be up early. So I just basically devoted that hour of time. The other thing that isn't really discipline, but I think is very useful, which is, and I am constantly learning this lesson myself again and again and again. If something occurs to you, don't think you're going to remember it. Like
Mm.
if you're not in that hour where you're writing down and you're just like in the shower or whatever, or you're at your job or you're at a gas station, whatever, find a piece of find a piece of paper or put the voice memo on your phone or send yourself a message at a different phone line and tell yourself the idea because it will escape you and you will never remember it again.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how obvious it is, how you're like, I will never forget that. It's like you will definitely forget it. So
Yeah.
that's it's a different form of discipline, but it's like grab those ideas when they come to you because they may never come to you again, and you want to make sure you have them.
Yeah.
So I have a million pieces of paper that have been floating around, and I saved some of them. A lot of them go in the trash, but it's just like one sentence on a scrap of paper that I'm like, oh, that goes in chapter 5. I got to remember that, and just I put it on my desk and make sure I integrate it into the manuscript when I get a chance.
I love it. Where do most of these out of the scheduled time ideas happen to you? Is it in the shower? Is it on a walk? Are you hanging out with your wife? Like where do they mostly happen, or is
I
it
think
just
it
scattered?
does mostly happen in the shower because
Mm.
you're forced to be in the moment in the
Yeah.
shower to a large extent. You know, of course your mind can wander in there, but you know, I definitely have a problem with my mind wandering and worrying about all the disparate problems we all have, whether they're large or small. And that does occupy a large portion of my day. But sometimes in the shower, you just kind of like the time when you're forced to be in the present because otherwise you're not going to get what you need to accomplish. There's very limited tasks you have to accomplish in the shower, right? So you've got to be at least focused to a certain degree on those things. Ideas definitely tend to pop into my head in the shower. Or if I'm cooking or prepping to cook, like
Mm.
cutting vegetables or something like that, again, you need to kind of be in the moment. And
Yeah.
being in the moment somehow allows your subconscious to offer up ideas that it's kind of been working on when you weren't looking.
I love
Um,
that.
the other part of it, I think, of being creative and being disciplined in your creativity is knowing, not forcing it. Like you have to force yourself to sit down, but like when you hit a stumbling block, you have to have the confidence to know that if you put it, you know what the question is, you let the question kind of simmer like cooking in your subconscious for a while. Usually your subconscious will come up with something. So whether it's the next day or the next week or whatever, something that's been bedeviling you can often um, all of a sudden pop up, and now you have the answer that you were looking for. But if you keep pounding at it, you'll just get frustrated and feel like it's impossible. And usually most problems you encounter they're never, in terms of writing, are never
Yeah.
impossible. We all have our impossible tasks that seem to have no answer in the real life, but that's one good thing. When you're creating, you have a little bit more control than you do in the actual world.
I don't know. I feel like that letting go would be advantageous to almost anything in our lives. This crisis comes in and it's like, okay, I know I have to deal with this. I'm not ignoring it, but let me just relax into this a little bit. And then the best answer can come up.
Sure. I mean, yes, that is the case. And sometimes the problems solve themselves, Um, the whatever that I'm dealing with a bunch of tax related stuff right now because unfortunately my father, after a very long life, passed away last year at the age of 90.
Mm.
Um, but he lived in Illinois and I live in California, and I've been dealing with all his estate and all this. And I got a letter from the Illinois tax authority that I did not see coming. And like, they want me to prove that I'm my father in order to submit his last tax return. I'm like, I'm submitting it because he's passed away. I cannot prove to you that I'm him because I am not him, but it is a legitimate return. We're not trying to perpetrate some sort of fraud. You guys know that he passed away, right? So that's the latest thing that has come to me. And I think I'm going to have to deal with that, but I thought there was another problem coming my way and I was worried about
Mm.
that problem. So I probably should have worried less about that problem because the problem that presented itself to me was not the one I was worried about.
Oh my gosh, your subconscious like, don't worry about that one. I got you. When in writing the book, going back to the book, did anything surprise you besides, maybe a new character popping up, but did anything come out almost in a cathartic way? You were writing this character is you. Did he say anything or do anything that you're like, oh, that's me? And that like, did anything surprise you in that realm?
I mean, there were some the most surprising thing is that the one of the villains in the book ended up being a friend at
Mm.
the end. And I didn't see that coming. And actually, I can't take credit for the idea. The idea came from my wife again, who's one of my readers and suggested things to me. But there was a kid that he didn't like in his neighborhood, and this isn't a big spoiler at the end of the book. It doesn't
Okay,
really.
good.
It's kind of a secondary character, but they end up being friends after all said and done. The experiences that Zenith goes through in Grabog, the other world, the wonderland of my book, um, allowed him to see this relationship that he thought was one thing from a different perspective, and it allowed him to get past the animosity he had towards this other young boy and make a friend of him. So that was something I didn't see coming. It's nothing I intended when I started off the book. As I said, it was a suggestion from my wife, but it was, I was like, that's a great idea.
Mm.
That shows him that he's grown in a way that I couldn't represent any other way from the plot, the main plot of the book. So that was a surprise to me.
I love that. I love that. And how can we expect Zenith to grow over the next two books that are going to come out? Don't give us too much, obviously. Have they already been written?
One of them's been written. It'll be out next summer. Each one of them is going to come out of summer. This one's out summer 23, the second one's summer 24, and then the third one will be out summer 25. That's the schedule right now. Always subject to
No
change.
pressure.
No, I can make that schedule. They had
Oh,
me on an
good.
earlier schedule, which I was not going to make, but we've
Mm,
adjusted the schedule. And actually, it's great because I guess books that are kind of geared towards Halloween and are scary usually appear sometime in the summer, so there's a little bit of
yeah.
ramp up time. So I'm a huge fan of Halloween. It's by far my favorite holiday. So I love the horror genre, obviously. So making scary books for kids is a dream come true, and I'm so happy that they're all going to be kind of lined up to be there for Halloween. But in the second, the main relationship in the first book is between him, Zenith, and his older sister Apogee, and that continues to be the case in the second and third book. The trilogy really centers around their relationship and how he's negotiating that relationship as they age, and what it means to be the younger sibling versus what it means to be the older sibling, and all that, and all the dynamics that go along with that. I had growing up, I was I was a result of my mother's second marriage. I'm my father's only child, but my mother was married before, and I have two older half brothers who I just considered my brothers. I grew up with them in the household, but they were 11 and 7 years older than me. So much
Mm,
like Zenith, who feels like now all of a sudden he's got a third parent when his sister Apogee starts kind of acting in a more responsible manner. I had kind of a second and third and fourth parents in my life with these older brothers of mine. My oldest brother very much acted like acted like another parent to me. My middle brother was more of a like, I'm much older and you will do whatever I say. He was
Hmm.
kind of the bossy one. So, I didn't get away with a lot. If one of my brothers was home, I wasn't going to get to watch what I wanted on television or do anything out of the realm of under their without them approving of it. So, that is the relationship that is central to the whole trilogy. And it goes through a lot of changes, and will continue to be changing as we go through books 2 and books 3, and
I love
hopefully
that.
they'll come to a good resolution at the end of book 3. I
Yeah, we
think they
shall
will.
see. We shall
I,
see.
I hope so.
What would you say to parents who can tell that their children are into this kind of genre, but they
Mhm.
might be a little hesitant or scared? What would you say to the kids who might be tuning in as well?
I mean, I was a scaredy cat as a kid. I didn't like any of this stuff when I was really young, and it took me
Hmm.
kind of a long process through my childhood and into my early teens and stuff to kind of become comfortable with the genre. And I mean, there's all levels of scariness out there. And so if you're interested in something scary, I mean, you and your parents can work together to pick out something that won't be too frightening for you to start with. But again, like if you want to avoid all this stuff and having written a scary book, I hope you won't. But if there's no shame in avoiding this stuff because it's just not your cup of tea. I avoided it for a very long time, and then I kind of flipped around and fell in love with it. I think everybody can come to this kind of stuff at their own pace. For me, the one of the first things that I read that would be considered kind of scarier, and it's pretty tame by today's standards, but still kind of creepy and fun, were the stories of Poe, the Raven and the Black Cat. My mother gave me a short story collection of his when I was in the hospital in, I think it must have been junior high. Um, and I would just devour the whole collection.
Mm.
Um, and his stuff is dark and creepy, but by today's standard, it's relatively tame. But I think there's all levels of this kind of stuff, and certainly you can touch the kind of spooky, scary stuff without getting too intense. Um, and I think this book is kind of on the safer end of the scale. I want it to be creepy and scary, but there's nothing too extreme in it or anything that's too gross. Though, we touch on a little bit of grossness, we touch on a little bit of scariness, a little bit of creepiness, and a lot of humor too. So I
Mm.
think it's a good place for kids to start who want to kind of dip their toe in this kind of genre. But there's certainly other stuff that's tamer out there and stuff that would be fun for the kids to enjoy. Um, so yeah, I would say you just, kind of you and your parents work together and figure out something that'll be right for you.
Well, and especially I'm a mom of two boys. And so it's like, I want them to be reading. I want to get them into a series. And it's
Mhm.
like to get their attention, to keep their attention in a book for boys. I don't know. To me, it's tougher. So to have something like this where it is creepy and ghoulish almost, and you
Mhm.
just don't know what's going to happen next, and it's funny, like that's really what's going to keep their attention and to establish a love of reading, because I grew up loving to read. I still do. Like I'm devouring books all the time. And so
Yeah.
I want to pass that on. And I know so many listeners tuning in have that same desire. And with boys, it's a little bit more of a challenge to get them into it. So I love that you're out there creating stuff like this to really
Well,
grab their
thank you. Yeah, I
attention.
mean, I definitely want boys and girls of all ages to enjoy this stuff, and the target group of the middle grade is really where we're shooting for. But I think it's fun for anybody to read,
Mhm.
and I do try and get it off to a quick start because I do want to grab the reader's attention. Because I I personally never did this as a kid. I don't think there's barely any book that I ever picked up that I didn't finish. But
Mhm.
I know like that's always an option for any reader is to read your book and stop reading it. Especially with all the distractions that
Yeah.
kids today have,
Yeah.
much more than we did. Sometimes when I grew up, we had, if you're lucky, you had 13 channels on your television. So when there was nothing good on TV, you played with your toys or I drew. But I
Mhm.
spent a ton of my time reading as well, especially rainy days or wintry days in Chicago where you really can't go outside for
Oh
very long
yeah.
anyways. Um, to escape in the book it's still a supreme pleasure. And I think I think any kid that doesn't read on a regular basis is really missing out. And that not because it's something you should do, but to be something because it's such a pleasure to
Yeah.
discover a good book or to discover a new author. There's so many books, so many authors out there. Like I know I'd heard of Edgar Allan Poe before my mom gave me that collection, but I'd never even gotten close to any of his
Yeah.
stories before. And there was a whole world that you could hold in your hands. That's the beauty of books, just the ability to dive into a completely new world, a new mind of an author. And if they've written many things, you've got a whole library basically in front of you to make your way through.
Yeah.
So I hope kids will like this book. I hope they'll stick around for the second and third books. Um, I'm definitely want to entertain them, and I'm doing my best to do so.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh my gosh, we are almost to the end of time. I want to be respectful of your time. If you had anything that you would want to leave with the listener today about the book, about your life, some kind of truth that you would want to leave with the
Oh
listener,
no, truth.
a nugget of truth.
I know
Um,
you get into all these deep themes on your
I
podcast. I'm like,
know.
I don't know if I'm deep enough for this show. I'm sorry, I interrupted
You're a
your
writer,
question.
you're a writer and a reader. You definitely are.
Well, yes. I don't know. Like the book it really the book at the kind of theme of the book is about memory and how we construct the story of our life. And Zenith really has some issues with that. He's remembering things from his own past that maybe not necessarily completely true. I was a very reflective a kid, and I'm still a very reflective adult. Part of that was because I had a horrible time getting to sleep most nights when I was a kid. It always took me an hour or more to get to sleep. So I had lots of time to kind of ruminate on the day's events and on my life and where things were going. And I do believe that the unexamined life is not worth living. I feel like we should look at ourselves and think about ourselves and think about our own past. But we also are always prone to create narratives out of our own past that may not necessarily be true. So I think it's important, even from a very young age, to look at your own life and have a realistic opinion on it and a realistic view of what's happened and what you've done. Both to not let your both to let yourself off the hook in some cases, and
Yeah.
also to not let yourself off the hook. It's easy for us to kind of escape past the bad things we've done in our life, but also to escape past the good things that we've done. And having been married for close to 30 years, my wife and I will look back on something that happened a long time ago, and we'll have very different perspectives on it.
Mm,
And it just points out the idea that like your memory is not a videotape that you're recording. You kind of you remember things in a way that aren't necessarily accurate. So that's kind of what the book kind of ruminates on, and what we should all ruminate on, I think, is just to basically trying to, as best we can, have a realistic assessment of who we are, what we've done, what we can do better, and what we've done well. I think all of us tend towards drama, especially in the internet, which encourages
yeah.
us to be dramatic. And sometimes that drama is called for, and sometimes it isn't. Sometimes we haven't necessarily been the hero or the villain of our own tale. We've just been someone who's survived through some stuff. And so
Mm,
I don't know. I think I'm kind of saying the same thing over and over again, but just basically the idea that to have an accurate idea of your own past it's a challenge that we all face, and one that you continue to face throughout your life, because we tend to wipe away the hard edges of things as we move forward.
yeah. But I think too, to that truth, it's a beautiful thing when you can look back honestly and have grace for yourself and your story, and to maybe not hold on so tight to things that you thought were necessarily so true at the time.
Yes, exactly. I mean, that's the way I've I feel that I'm guilty of that as much as anybody else. And the problem with these things is even recognizing the problem doesn't mean you won't fall prey to it.
Yeah. But at least we're having
um,
this conversation.
yeah, I mean, it's good to be aware of it at least, and know when you're falling into those traps yourself, hopefully. So,
Mhm.
I guess I would leave it there.
I love it. I love it. Okay, Rob. Well, we are at the end of time. Where can our listener find out more about you and get the book?
Well, you can get the book at bookstores everywhere now, I hope. But if you want to find out a little bit more about me, I have a website, robrenzetti.com. I'm on social media. I'm on Instagram barely, on Twitter quite a bit. I'm still calling it Twitter under protest. Um, so you can find me there. But if you want to, if you go to robrenzetti.com, there'll be links to where you can buy the horrible bag of terrible things. You can learn a little bit more about that, learn a little bit more about me, and also you can sign up for my newsletter. If you're a fan of, if you happen to be a fan of my old show, My Life as a Teenage Robot, I'm telling a new story with those characters for the first time in about 15, 16 years
Wow.
through my newsletter, a chapter at a time. So you could sign up for that if you're interested. But anyways, lots of stuff to dig into if you're so inclined.
Fabulous. And of course, as always, that will always be in the show notes for you guys. Rob, thank you so much for taking a little time to speak to the audience today. I really enjoyed this conversation. And I don't know, now I want to like dig into more horror stuff. And
Oh, I hope you will.
yeah, absolutely. Thanks so
That's
much.
I thank you, Liz. Thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure talking with you, and even the philosophical stuff, which I was deathly afraid of.
You did great.
Thank you.